What would you do if you saw a flight attendant slap a woman across the face on a luxury jet? And what if that woman turned out to be the undercover boss who owns the entire airline? Would the flight attendant be fired on the spot? Or is there an even bigger twist coming? Stick around to find out what really happened and drop a comment below. What do you think should happen to that flight attendant? The sun had just begun to yawn over Los Angeles, stretching its golden fingers across the smooth tarmac of a private airfield. The jet, sleek, silver, and humming with promise, sat poised like a lion before the pounce. No crowds, no noise, just the quiet luxury of power. Eleanor Hudson stepped out of the black car and into the soft morning air. The breeze tugged at her navy trench coat, as if it too were unsure she belonged in this world of polished chrome and hushed wealth. She adjusted her collar, heels clicking softly as she walked toward the jet. She looked ordinary. Comfortable slacks, low-heeled shoes, a no-nonsense ponytail, no makeup, no entourage, no sparkle. She didn't walk like a guest. She moved like someone who knew the space, like someone who had seen this world from both the inside and the outside. And that, in this world, was the problem. The problem wasn't Eleanor's presence. It was her appearance. She didn't look like a millionaire. She didn't dress like a CEO. She wasn't white. She wasn't young. And in the eyes of some, that meant she didn't belong. She stepped onto the plane's carpeted stairs, pausing for a breath before entering the quiet cabin. Everything inside was flawless. Leather seating, soft as a sigh. Wood grain polished to a mirror sheen. The kind of jet you'd expect to host tycoons, senators, or rock stars. Eleanor placed her modest black tote beside her favorite seat, second row, right-hand side. She eased out of her coat, folded it neatly, and draped it across the armrest. This seat had history. It had seen her cry quietly after her first major contract. It had held her steady during turbulence, both literal and emotional. But today, she was here not as a boss, not as a businesswoman, but as a test. And that test was about to begin sooner than expected. The calm was sliced open by the staccato tap of high heels, sharp and urgent like a ticking bomb. From the front of the plane, a voice called out, brisk, controlled, and laced with subtle alarm. "Excuse me, ma'am, who are you, and what are you doing here?" Eleanor turned slowly. There she was, Ashley Bennett. Young, white, pressed, polished. Her blonde bun tight enough to pull the corners of her face back. Her name badge gleamed under the LED cabin lights. She wasn't just doing her job. She was guarding the gates. Eleanor gave her a polite smile, the kind of smile women learn to use when they're being underestimated in boardrooms, banks, and now, apparently, on their own planes. "I'm meant to be here," she said, her voice low and calm. Ashley blinked, then smiled in that familiar way, a customer service smile dipped in suspicion. "Oh, and who exactly invited you on board?" Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "I'm a guest of the company." Ashley's smile dropped, the way a curtain drops, right before the gunshot in a stage play. "A guest of the company," she repeated, voice flatter now. "Right." This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a judgment dressed in polyester and power. Ashley didn't see a woman who built a multi-million-dollar airline from the ground up. She saw a threat to order, a disruption, a woman out of place in a palace. Ashley stepped closer. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step off the plane." Eleanor's fingers rested gently on the back of her seat, as if anchoring herself to the moment. "I'd prefer to wait for the captain," she replied. But Ashley wasn't interested in protocols. She was interested in control, in appearance, in keeping things just so. "Security can handle it if you'd like," she snapped. "You're not supposed to be here." The air between them turned heavy. Eleanor could feel the other passengers just outside, waiting to board. The jet, once silent and serene, now buzzed with tension. A string pulled tighter and tighter. Ashley's voice rose again, now louder. "I need you to leave. Now." Eleanor didn't raise her voice. She didn't plead. Instead, she straightened her back and met Ashley's gaze squarely. "Miss Bennett," she said, with the kind of softness that made you lean in, This is a learning moment. For you, for me, for everyone on this aircraft. You may not recognize me, but soon you will." Ashley froze, just for a second, just long enough for the first whispers of doubt to tickle the edge of her confidence. Eleanor took a seat, calmly crossing one leg over the other. The fight was over, she wasn't leaving. But the lesson? The lesson was just beginning. Ashley Bennett stood stiff, hands on her hips, the fluorescent lights above her casting a harsh glow over the cabin. Her eyes were locked onto Eleanor like a hawk that had spotted a threat slinking through a henhouse. "I'm not going to ask again," Ashley said. "Either you tell me who you are and what you're doing on this jet, or I will call for airport security." Eleanor tilted her head slightly, observing the young woman in front of her, as one might observe a particularly eager intern. Competent, perhaps, but green, overconfident in her role, underdeveloped in judgment. "I already told you," Eleanor replied evenly. "I'm a guest of the company." Ashley let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "And which company is that, ma'am?" Eleanor took her time answering. She wasn't here to react. She was here to reveal, slowly, intentionally, like peeling away the layers of a truth too long ignored. "Skyward Aviation," she said. Ashley blinked. "You're telling me," she said, almost choking on the words, "that you are a guest of Skyward Aviation? On this jet?" "That's correct." The silence that followed was thick and cloying, like honey poured over suspicion. Ashley's lips pursed, her mind raced. This woman didn't look like a guest, didn't dress like one, didn't behave like one. She had walked in like she owned the place. She wasn't apologizing, she wasn't shrinking. People who weren't supposed to be here always shrank. And that terrified Ashley more than she could admit. "You're not listed," Ashley snapped. "There's no Eleanor Hudson on the manifest." "I wouldn't be," Eleanor replied, brushing a piece of lint from her slacks. "Not under that name. But again, I suggest you get the captain." Ashley's jaw clenched. "I don't need the captain to confirm what's obvious. You're trespassing." Eleanor looked out the window for a moment, watching a hawk circle far above the airfield, free, untouchable, confident in the wind. She turned back. "What exactly do you think I'm doing here?" Ashley didn't hesitate. "Trying to scam your way onto a private jet. It happens. We've had people sneak onto aircraft before." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Do I look like someone who needs to sneak?" "You don't look like someone who belongs on a jet like this," Ashley snapped. And there it was, the truth, bare and ugly and unfiltered. Like lightning splitting the sky, the words hung in the air. Too fast to take back, too loud to pretend no one heard. Eleanor sat very still, hands resting on her knees like a queen on an invisible throne. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "I see," she said softly. "So it's not just that I'm not on the list. It's that I don't fit your idea of who should be." Ashley faltered for just a breath, her tongue suddenly heavy behind her teeth. "That's not what I meant," she said quickly. "No?" Eleanor asked, "because it sounds like what you meant." Ashley's skin flushed a deep crimson, like a warning light blinking too late. She opened her mouth to speak again, but the cabin door clicked. Voice. The first wave of passengers was arriving. A pair of executives in tailored suits stepped on board, chatting about quarterly numbers and stock dips. A young woman in designer sunglasses followed close behind, scrolling on her phone, not yet aware of the storm she was stepping into. Ashley straightened, as if snapped back to duty. But Eleanor didn't flinch. She simply leaned back in her seat, crossing one leg over the other. Her body language whispered, "Let's see how far you're willing to go with this." Ashley took a step forward, lowering her voice to a harsh whisper. "I don't know who you think you are, but if you don't leave this aircraft in the next 2 minutes, I will physically remove you." And for the first time, Eleanor's posture shifted, barely. A breath, a recalibration of her gaze. "You would put your hands on me?" Ashley's nostrils flared. "If that's what it takes." A pin could have dropped in the silence between them. "You might want to rethink that," Eleanor said quietly. "Because the moment you lay a finger on me, this becomes something you can't undo." Ashley didn't hear her, or maybe she did, but her ego was louder. "I warned you," she hissed, stepping in. And that's when it happened. Her hand shot forward, fast, hard, and slapped Eleanor across the face. The sound cracked through the cabin like thunder in a church. Everything froze. A man mid-step tripped on the threshold. The executive's mouth dropped open. Even the woman in sunglasses pulled her AirPods out. Eleanor's cheek reddened from the impact, but she didn't flinch. She didn't cry out. She simply turned her head back, slowly, and looked Ashley dead in the eyes. And smiled. Not with amusement. Not with kindness. But with calm, measured power. "I was hoping this wouldn't be necessary," she said. And now the true story, the real story, was about to begin. For a long moment after the slap, Eleanor didn't move. Her face burned, not just from the sting of Ashley's hand, but from the heat of 1,000 memories rushing in like a wave, cold and wild and crashing into her composure. She didn't see the inside of the plane anymore. She saw Detroit, 1986, a bus stop at 5:00 a.m. She was 15, shivering in a thrift store coat 2 sizes too big, waiting with her mother. Her mother's breath had fogged the air as she whispered, "Never let them see you flinch, Ellie. If they can make you flinch, they think they've already won." That memory returned to her now, vivid and sharp like the slap itself, a gift from a past that refused to stay quiet. Her gaze dropped for a moment to the carpeted aisle, where Ashley's shadow fell like a barrier between her and the world she'd built. And then, like a reel snapping back to the first frame, the story began to rewind. Because none of it was an accident. Eleanor had boarded this plane for a reason. 3 weeks earlier, she had sat in her corner office 47 floors above the noise of the city. Skyward Aviation's headquarters gleamed in the skyline like a crown. The company had just surpassed $2 billion, 0 cents in annual revenue. Profits were soaring, investors were thrilled, but Eleanor wasn't smiling. She sat alone after the board meeting, staring at the company's new marketing slogan on a glossy brochure. Excellence in the sky. Excellence, a beautiful word, a dangerous one, too, because she knew what was hiding behind it. Emails from clients who felt mistreated, reports of staff making assumptions, whispered complaints from junior employees about tone, attitude, feeling invisible. It wasn't a storm. It was erosion, quiet, slow, and devastating. And if she didn't act now, Skyward's culture would rot from the inside. So she did what Eleanor Hudson always did when faced with a challenge. She got uncomfortable. "I want to fly," she had said to her head of operations. "No security, no VIP treatment, no announcement. I want to see what my employees say when they don't know who's listening." They'd stared at her like she'd grown a second head. "You want to be undercover?" one had asked. "Yeah, like a secret shopper." "No," she said, smiling tightly, like a woman who's tired of hearing the wrong stories about her company. And that's how Operation Ghost Seat began. She chose flights at random, blended in, took notes. Some flights were fine, some weren't. But this one would become legend. Back in the present, she looked up again. Ashley was standing perfectly still, hand frozen at her side, her face pale as realization started to knock. Passengers were watching, their phones were out. The silence was volcanic. And still, Eleanor didn't move. Because in her mind, she wasn't in the cabin. She was back in that boardroom, watching men in suits tell her she was too aggressive, too unpolished, too young when she first pitched Skyward. She was in bank lobbies where she was asked if she was there to clean. She was on trade show floors where people handed brochures to her assistant, not to her. She was everywhere people saw her skin before they saw her name. And she had had enough. This wasn't just about Ashley. It was about all the Ashleys. Every gatekeeper who thought they could decide who belonged in what space. This was about every person who had ever been dismissed, disregarded, or disrespected because someone else assumed they didn't measure up. She had built Skyward not just for profit, but for people, for travelers who didn't see themselves in first-class lounges, for dreamers who never thought they'd set foot on a private jet. And yet here she was, being treated like a trespasser in her own kingdom. A slow, deliberate breath passed through Eleanor's nose. The weight of years settled into her spine, but it didn't bend her. It forged her straighter. She didn't need to scream. Her silence was louder than fury. Her calm was the storm. Eleanor stood, slowly, brushing off her coat, and turned her body to face the growing crowd of passengers, now halfway through boarding. They were watching, wide-eyed, unsure of who the villain was, but something inside them whispered, it wasn't her. She looked back at Ashley, who now looked as if her feet were glued to the floor. "You still think I don't belong here," Eleanor said, "but the difference between you and me is I didn't assume." Ashley opened her mouth. No words came out. "And Eleanor?" Eleanor just smiled again. Not warmly, not cruelly, but with the quiet, devastating certainty of someone who knew exactly who she was. The woman who had once stood in the cold at a Detroit bus stop now stood in a jet she owned, and someone was about to find out what it really meant to mistake power for passiveness. The air inside the jet had turned into something you could slice with a knife, thick with tension, humiliation, and the quiet dread that someone had just made a terrible mistake. Ashley still stood there, her hand trembling slightly, as if it had only just realized what it had done. The heat from the slap had already left Eleanor's cheek, but the echo of it still ricocheted through the cabin like the aftermath of a gunshot in a cathedral. One of the passengers, a man in a tailored gray suit with a Bluetooth headset clipped to his ear, looked around in confusion, his mouth opened to speak, then closed again. Something told him to stay silent. A child clung tighter to his mother's arm. A phone camera blinked to life. Ashley took a step back, blinking as if trying to wake up from a nightmare she had written herself into. "I'm calling security," she stammered, reaching for the radio clipped to her waistband. Eleanor didn't move. She didn't raise a hand to her face. She didn't return the slap. Instead, she turned back toward her seat and slowly picked up her coat. She dusted it off with the same care one might give to an heirloom, as if she were brushing away not lint, but judgment, misunderstanding, contempt. Then, in a voice soft as velvet but sharp as a scalpel, she said, "Please, do call them." Ashley hesitated. This woman wasn't reacting the way people normally did. She wasn't shouting, she wasn't crying, she wasn't begging. And that made her terrifying, because only people with power react like that. Only people with nothing to prove stay that calm after being slapped. Ashley's hand hovered over the radio. The passengers were watching. The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop a degree. From the front of the aircraft, the cockpit door opened, and everything changed. Captain Thomas Gates stepped into the aisle, adjusting the silver stripes on his jacket sleeve. He was tall, composed, with skin like polished mahogany and wisdom graying at his temples. His eyes scanned the cabin and landed instantly on Eleanor. He stopped cold, then nodded. "Miss Hudson," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "is everything all right?" The name hit the air like a lightning bolt. Ashley spun around. She's Miss Hudson? The murmurs started immediately, crippling down the cabin like dominoes tipping over each other. Someone gasped. Someone else muttered, "Oh my God," under their breath. Eleanor didn't even glance at Ashley. Her eyes stayed locked on the captain. "I believe," she said, "there's been a serious misunderstanding." Captain Gates stepped forward, every movement crisp and respectful. "I'm very sorry, ma'am," he said, throwing Ashley a glare that could melt titanium. "We'll handle this immediately." Ashley's face drained of color. Her fingers let go of the radio like it had turned into a hot coal. She stumbled a half step backward and reached out to steady herself against the seat. "She said she owns the plane," Ashley whispered, as if saying it out loud might make it less true. Eleanor finally turned to her. "I don't just own the plane," she said, her voice rich and unshakable. "I own the company, Skyward Aviation Group, this jet, this flight, every employee on it." She let that sit. Let it simmer. Let it burn. Ashley didn't speak. couldn't speak. Her lips parted, but her body had gone slack, like a puppet cut from its strings. Eleanor reached into her blazer, pulled out a small black business card and placed it gently on the nearest tray table. The card caught the light like obsidian, minimal, elegant, final. It read, Eleanor Hudson, founder and CEO, Skyward Aviation Group. Ashley stared at it like it was a detonator. The silence was complete. Even the hum of the engines seemed to bow to it. One of the passengers, an older woman in pearls, nodded slowly, with an expression somewhere between awe and fury. Another whispered to her partner, "She's the boss, the one they talked about in Forbes." Captain Gates leaned in toward Ashley and said, low and deadly, "You need to apologize." Now. Ashley turned toward Eleanor, throat working like it was trying to swallow rocks. Her hands were shaking. I'm sorry," she choked out. Eleanor didn't move, didn't blink. "Think forgive." She just stared. Ashley's voice broke further. "Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't mean to." "But you did," Eleanor said. 4 words, ice on glass. "You looked at me," she continued, "and decided who I was before I even opened my mouth. You disrespected me, you put your hands on me, not because I was wrong, but because you couldn't imagine I could be right." Ashley's breath stuttered in her chest. The passengers were still watching, still waiting. Eleanor stepped forward, not to strike back, but to teach. "I'm not going to fire you," she said. Ashley blinked in shock. "You're not?" "No," Eleanor said. "You're going to stay right here. You're going to serve every passenger on this flight, including me, with the respect I should have received from the moment I stepped on board." Ashley's throat tightened. "Yes, ma'am." And just like that, the flight resumed. But nothing was the same, because now every passenger knew the story wasn't about a slap. It was about a line that had been crossed and a woman who refused to lower herself, to step back. For the next several minutes, the cabin didn't move, not in the usual sense. Yes, passengers continued boarding. Yes, luggage thumped into overhead compartments. Yes, the engines rumbled to life. But all of it happened under a suffocating silence, a heavy stillness that blanketed every corner of the cabin. People were whispering, but not the idle, casual whispers of pre-flight chatter. These were surgical whispers. Cutting? Deliberate. "That's her," someone mouthed, motioning subtly toward Eleanor. "The owner? She owns everything on this plane." A man near the emergency exit leaned toward his seatmate. "Did you see the slap?" His seatmate nodded slowly. "I heard it. It was loud." Someone else said, "She didn't even flinch, like she was made of iron." Even the flight attendant working in the rear galley, James, a quiet man with salt and pepper hair, kept glancing forward like he couldn't decide whether to hide or salute. Ashley, meanwhile, had become a ghost. She moved stiffly, offering drinks with hands that trembled ever so slightly. Her face was flushed, her lips pressed so tight they had turned pale. Every step she took was calculated, every glance she made was hesitant. But no one spoke to her. Not yet. All eyes kept drifting back to Eleanor. She wasn't trying to command attention, she wasn't doing anything extraordinary, she was simply being. She sat in her second-row seat with perfect posture, her blazer folded neatly beside her, her hands resting gently in her lap. She looked out the window, not at the passengers. But they all looked at her, because they couldn't look away. Something about her silence was louder than shouting. It pulled on the room like gravity, bending all the attention toward her without her asking for it. It was power, but not the loud performative kind. This was real power, quiet, immovable, unapologetic. From across the aisle, a middle-aged woman leaned toward her husband. "She's going to fire that girl, right?" The man shrugged. "Maybe not." "Why not?" "Because she didn't have to. Look at her. That girl's already been fired in her soul." They both turned to look at Ashley, who was now pouring sparkling water like her life depended on every bubble staying intact. Then came the questions. Not the ones spoken aloud, but the ones everyone was thinking. Why didn't she fire her on the spot? Why did she stay so calm? What is she going to do next? The whole cabin felt like a balloon filled to the edge, tight, stretched, one sharp word away from bursting. Ashley approached Eleanor's row cautiously, a glass of water trembling in her grip. "Ma'am," she said, barely above a whisper, room temperature. "No ice, just like you asked." Eleanor didn't look at her right away. She took the glass, set it on the tray table, then finally she turned. Her eyes met Ashley's, and something shifted. Not rage, not pity, but something far more difficult to face. Clarity. The kind that showed you exactly who you were, stripped bare under someone else's truth. "Thank you," Eleanor said. 2 words. But to Ashley, they landed like a gavel. She stepped back, her lips parted in silent confusion. That was it? Thank you? No lecture? No punishment? No public condemnation? She returned to her post, but her mind was unraveling, fraying thread by thread under the weight of Eleanor's calm. Because silence doesn't always mean forgiveness. Sometimes, silence is the mirror you're forced to stare into. And Ashley was beginning to see herself for the first time. As the plane rolled toward the runway, a passenger in the back row pulled out his phone and began typing. "On a flight right now, something crazy just happened. I think the CEO is undercover. A flight attendant slapped her. And now, she's just sitting there, like a queen. Like she's letting the whole cabin sit with the truth before she moves a single finger. I can't stop watching. And neither could anyone else. Because when someone holds power with grace and refuses to swing it recklessly, it forces everyone around them to examine who they really are. And somewhere deep in the hearts of every passenger, a question echoed. If she didn't react with anger, what does that say about me?" Ashley stood at the front of the cabin, hands tightly clasped behind her back, her nails digging into the skin of her palm. Her mouth was dry, her heart pounded not like a drum, but like a fist against a locked door. From the outside, she looked composed, barely, but inside her mind was unraveling in real time, memory by memory, like photos tumbling from a shoebox she hadn't meant to open. And just like that, she was no longer 32, standing in a luxury jet. She was 12, a girl in a polyester dress and Payless shoes, standing outside a gated community in Tampa, gripping her mother's hand as they waited for a shuttle to take them to a catering job. The guard never looked at her. He only looked at her mother's uniform, then waved them through like luggage, not people. Later that night, as her mother cleaned up after a wealthy birthday party, Ashley had wandered into the side of the ballroom and stood in awe at the crystal chandeliers, the chocolate fountain, the rows of champagne flutes. A girl in a pink dress had looked at her, frowned, and said, "You're not supposed to be here." And Ashley had believed her. That belief clung to her like smoke long after the smell of that party faded. So she worked hard, pushed herself through school, interviews, training, always with the same goal, to belong somewhere people once told her she didn't. She polished her voice until it was soft enough not to offend. She learned to hold her shoulders back, not too stiff, but just right. She memorized wine pairings, seatbelt demos, emergency codes, guest lists, everything except how to see people clearly, because no one had taught her that. Back in the jet, Ashley stared blankly ahead while her body moved on autopilot. Offer towels, smile, pour drinks, nod, apologize. But she wasn't in control anymore. Her thoughts swirled around that woman in row 2 like planets around the sun, each one crashing into another. You slapped her. She didn't fight back. She owns everything you stand on. And she's watching you, still watching you. It wasn't just embarrassment she felt. It was shame, the kind that grows roots in your stomach, the kind that whispers, "You've become the thing you once feared." Ashley remembered her first week at Skyward, how proud she'd been to get in, how she'd promised herself, "I'll treat every passenger like they matter. I'll be the reason someone smiles today. I'll prove I belong here, not just for me, but for every girl like me." But today she hadn't made someone smile. She had made a woman flinch, even if that woman had refused to show it. And worse, she had made her feel invisible. She caught her reflection in the brushed steel of the galley, and she didn't recognize the woman looking back. She looked like someone afraid, someone cornered, someone small. But then in the reflection she saw Eleanor, just over her shoulder, not watching, just existing. Composed, grounded, centered in a way Ashley had never known how to be. And something inside Ashley cracked, not loudly, not visibly, but enough for the light to get in. She turned away from the reflection and leaned against the galley wall, whispering under her breath, "I missed her." It wasn't a confession to Eleanor. It was a confession to herself. For the rest of the flight, Ashley didn't speak unless spoken to. She didn't avoid her work, but she did it differently. More present, more careful. Every tray she handed out, every water glass she delivered, was an apology in motion. She didn't dare look at Eleanor again, but she felt her. Like a lighthouse, she kept in the corner of her vision, guiding her through the storm she had made. And deep down, Ashley knew this flight wouldn't be remembered because of how smooth it was. It would be remembered because it changed her. Not with punishment, but with truth. And truth, she was learning, didn't always come from authority figures or lectures. Sometimes it came from silence. Sometimes it came from the one person you never thought to listen to. The jet cut through the sky, smooth as silk, engines humming like a lullaby, but no one was lulled. Not today. The cabin wasn't just flying, it was recalibrating. Where once there was casual chatter, now there were glances, quiet nods, averted eyes, a heightened awareness that something monumental had happened and was still unfolding. Passengers looked not just at Eleanor but to her. She hadn't said a word in over an hour. And yet, everything in that aircraft revolved around her. Eleanor sat with the quiet authority of a monarch at peace with her crown. She didn't fidget. She didn't scroll through her phone. She simply was anchored, composed, and entirely unbothered by the very tension she had caused. But it wasn't arrogance. It was discipline, and that distinction made all the difference. She had been raised in a world where stillness was mistaken for weakness, where silence was misunderstood as permission. But she had learned that stillness could be strategy, that silence could be a scalpel, and today, both were working in her favor. Captain Gates stepped out from the cockpit once more. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. He walked the aisle with a measured pace, stopping beside Eleanor's seat. "Ma'am," he said quietly, bending slightly so others wouldn't hear, "would you like us to escort Miss Bennet off the flight?" Eleanor didn't look up right away. Instead, she folded the corner of the linen napkin resting on her tray, one small crease, intentional. Then she met his eyes. "No," she said. Captain Gates nodded once, as if that single syllable carried the weight of a closing courtroom verdict. "Understood." He turned to go, but paused. "I just want to say thank you for how you've handled this." Eleanor nodded slightly. "Leadership isn't about being loud, Captain." He smiled faintly, then returned to the cockpit. Ashley had overheard every word. Her knees nearly gave out. But she didn't cry. She didn't collapse. Because now she understood something she hadn't that morning. It wasn't about her. It never was. This was bigger than embarrassment, bigger than ego. This was about perception, pattern, assumption, power. She had been given a second chance not because she deserved it, but because someone stronger than her had chosen to teach instead of destroy. And now she had to earn her place again. As the jet soared above the cotton clouds, Eleanor closed her eyes for the first time since the slap. Not to rest, but to reflect. She thought of her younger self, how she would have reacted 10 years ago, even 5. Would she have shouted, fired on the spot, humiliated the offender publicly? Maybe. But growth is a strange thing. It doesn't arrive like a sunrise. It creeps in like fog. And one day you look around and realize you're not who you used to be. And that was a win greater than any quarterly report. Toward the rear of the cabin, a man in his 60s leaned toward his wife and whispered, "She's not just the boss, she's the standard." His wife nodded. "Makes you wonder how many people we've misjudged." The man looked out the window, then back at Eleanor. "Too many," he said. A few rows up, a younger woman pulled out her journal and jotted a note. "Grace under fire isn't weakness, it's control." And Eleanor? She simply exhaled, not in relief, but in resolve. The cabin wasn't just in the air anymore. It was elevated. Not because of altitude, but because of awareness. And for the first time in a long time, Eleanor believed maybe, just maybe, the message would land before the plane did. The seatbelt sign lit up with a soft ding as the jet began its slow descent into Dallas Love Field. The flight was nearly over, but the story most certainly was not. Eleanor opened her eyes just as the skyline came into view. Sunlit towers standing tall in the morning haze, unaware of the storm quietly brewing aboard the jet above. Ashley hadn't spoken to her again, not a word, but Eleanor knew. She could feel it in the glances, in the energy that shifted every time Ashley passed by, the fear, the regret, the growing awareness of what was coming. Because Ashley understood now, the worst punishment wasn't being shouted at in front of a crowd. It was not knowing. It was waiting for the consequences. It was being asked to keep going, act normal, serve coffee, and fold napkins, with a quiet dread in your chest, because the decision hadn't yet come down. And Eleanor, she knew the value of the pause. She understood that people remember not just what happens, but how long they had to sit in it. So she let Ashley wait. Let her wonder. Let the weight of that waiting settle like gravity around her neck. Captain Gates returned over the intercom, voice steady but somehow more respectful than before. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final descent into Dallas. On behalf of Skyward Aviation and our CEO Eleanor Hudson, we thank you for flying with us today." That single sentence flipped the energy of the entire cabin. People straightened in their seats. Necks craned. Whispers reignited. He said her name. He confirmed it. She really is the CEO. Ashley nearly dropped the silver tray she was clearing. And Eleanor? She reached for her blazer, brushing it off again like ritual. She slipped it on slowly, like armor. Like royalty readorning her crown. The man in seat 3A, a tech founder from Austin, leaned forward, voice barely above a breath. "I wonder if she'll fire her the moment we land." The woman beside him shook her head. "No, that would be too easy." "What do you mean?" "She's not angry, she's teaching, and that kind of lesson doesn't happen with a pink slip. It happens when you make someone serve the person they disrespected, make them feel it." Ashley moved slowly now, as if every inch of carpet under her shoes could collapse. Her breath came shallow. Her eyes darted toward the cockpit, then toward Eleanor, then back again. The plane touched down with a smooth grace, but inside Ashley, everything was crashing. The jet rolled toward the private terminal and came to a stop. The cabin filled with the usual sounds, seatbelts unclipping, bags being retrieved, polite murmurs. But underneath all of it, a pulse of suspense throbbed. No one was moving fast. Everyone was waiting for the moment. The decision, the verdict. Eleanor stood last. Deliberately, as she walked toward the front, Ashley stood frozen near the exit door. Her hands were clasped in front of her now, trembling slightly. She looked like she wanted to speak, apologize again, maybe even beg, but the words stuck to her teeth like wet paper. Standing beside her was a man in a dark suit with a Skyward Aviation pin on his lapel, corporate. His presence alone said everything. This wasn't over. And Ashley knew it. Eleanor approached. The air seemed to shrink between them. Ashley took a breath to speak, but Eleanor held up one hand, not to silence, but to pause, because what she was about to say next would change everything. Want to know what she said, what decision she made, why she chose not to destroy but to elevate? Stay with us, because what happens next might just change how you treat people forever. The private terminal was quiet. Too quiet. Passengers had already disembarked, some with hushed goodbyes, others with lingering looks toward Eleanor. Many had offered subtle nods, silent gestures of respect, as if they understood they had witnessed something rare. Not just authority, but grace in its purest form. Eleanor stood near the exit, unhurried, her bag slung lightly over her shoulder. The man in the corporate suit remained beside Ashley, clipboard in hand, face unreadable. Ashley stood still, too still. Her posture was that of a child awaiting punishment. But her eyes? They held something deeper now. Not fear, not resistance. Just the unmistakable ache of reckoning. Eleanor stepped forward. The corporate officer moved slightly, as if to initiate protocol. But Eleanor held up a hand. "I'd like to speak to her alone." He nodded. Kwasi stepped away. Now it was just the two of them. The woman who had built an empire, and the woman who, in a single moment, nearly shattered her own future. Ashley opened her mouth, but again, no words came. Eleanor looked at her with a kind of calm that didn't feel passive. It felt earned. The kind of calm that only comes from walking through fire and remembering not to scream. "People will forget what you said," Eleanor began, voice low and clear. "They might even forget what you did." Ashley blinked, her throat tightening. "But they will never forget how you made them feel." The sentence struck like a chisel against ice. Ashley's voice finally escaped, brittle and shaking. "I didn't mean to—" "But you did," Eleanor interrupted softly. "Because when you saw me, you didn't see a CEO. You didn't see a woman with decades of experience. You didn't even see a person." Ashley's face crumbled. Tears welled up, but didn't fall. "I saw what I thought was out of place," she whispered. Eleanor nodded slowly. "That's the problem. Too many of us are taught to trust our assumptions more than our curiosity." Ashley looked down, ashamed. "I don't know how to make this right." Eleanor paused, considering her next words with precision. "Then start by listening. To everyone, not just people who look like your version of success. And when you see someone who doesn't fit, ask yourself why that matters to you." Ashley's shoulders trembled. Are you going to fire me?" Eleanor stepped closer, so close they could hear each other breathe. "I should," she said. "Some would say I have every right." Ashley nodded quickly, eyes brimming. "But firing you," Eleanor continued, "teaches nothing. Watching this moment haunt you, that might actually teach everything." A beat passed. Ashley whispered, "So, I stay." Eleanor's voice was even. "You stay, you learn, and every time you put on that uniform, you remember today. Not because of the slap, but because of the silence that followed." Outside, the car pulled up. Eleanor turned to leave but stopped at the door. Without looking back, she said, "You have one job from here on out, Ashley. Make sure no one else ever feels the way you made me feel." And with that, she stepped into the sunlight. As Eleanor slid into the back seat of the car, the driver, another woman, sharp suit, locks tied neatly behind, looked at her through the rear-view mirror. "You good, ma'am?" Eleanor exhaled. A slow, quiet breath that carried not exhaustion, but clarity. "I'm good," she replied. The car pulled away, the private terminal growing smaller in the rear window. Her cheek no longer stung, not physically, anyway. But what lingered wasn't the pain. It was the bigger truth. People are judged every day before they speak. By clothes, by color, by assumptions handed down like bad family heirlooms. And most people don't get to respond from a seat of power. But today, Eleanor did. And she used that power not to punish, but to transform. As the car faded into traffic, a final line hung in the air, bold across the screen. Respect begins where judgment ends. And real power? It doesn't raise its voice. It simply never flinches. If this story moved you, if you've ever been misjudged or found yourself judging someone too quickly, share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done if you were Eleanor or Ashley? And if you believe that true respect has nothing to do with appearances, share this video with someone who needs to hear that message, because sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest truths.